incident was about to take place that would shake the foundations of the civilized world.
It is time to open your mind. Time to discover your divine self as we navigate this holographic matrix together. Strap in, cosmic family, as we slide through this wormhole of cosmic information together in search of the truth.
You can't handle the truth.
It's time to go inside the matrix. With your host, Jimmy Brent.
Hey everybody, welcome to Inside the Matrix. We're so glad you're here with us today. And as always, before we start the show, I want to thank those of you who are supporting the show and helping us keep this going. It is much appreciated, especially the Florida chick. She has gone above and beyond, and we really appreciate her. Thank you so much. And today's guest, we're bringing back Randy Maugans, a gentleman that we highly respect and admire. And I think most of you out there are familiar with him. But in case you're not, he's a long-time broadcaster, writer. He's been doing YouTube videos and radio shows for many, many years. And he's really an astute visionary and someone that has the ability to see what's really going on in the world, both intellectually and spiritually. So that's why we love talking with him. So Randy, welcome to the show. We got you. We hear you.
Okay. My unmute button was stuck there.
Oh.
So first off, you called me a gentleman. There are definitely people out there that would disagree with that, but I do strive for civility.
Yeah, and of course you are. And you're a voice of rational voice out there in the midst of a lot of really, really hysterical people, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And that is the kind of the order of the day. And let's get right into it. Let's talk about the incredible manipulation that's going on. That started out, just hunker down for a couple of weeks and then we'll be back to normal. And of course, I think we've all realized now that it's never going to go back to normal if those people have their way.
Yeah, well, normal as defined by whom?
Yeah.
That's kind of the subtext of the whole thing, is when do things go back to normal? And the answer is never. But let's talk about your normal. What was that? Because it's like that was a script too. Yep. So in the midst of all this strangeness, what it does for anybody who can sit down, breathe really deeply, and begin to assess the landscape, you ask yourself, exactly how did all of this become ordered the way it is? And is there an alternative to it? Because it looks like they're blocking access to all of my old normal things, like, earning a living, being able to buy groceries, just silly little things that you do.
Silly little things, yeah.
Yeah. And so suddenly you're confronted with the existentialism of everyday life. How complicated does it get? I mean, for me, it's as complicated as, can I say that? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no problem.
I forgot my mask because I play along with the game, and there are places where I go, and there are actually requirements on me as part of my own employment.
Oh, yeah.
That under certain conditions, I have to present masked. And it's not often, and it's not very long. I attenuate all that. But the simple fact of the matter is that all of a sudden, in this modern world, we're either confronted with, we don't have the mask, we forgot the mask, we've got the mask. Gosh, the mask smells pretty awful at this point. Or dealing with the fact that you're not going to do the mask at all and go into public, and basically as an affront to what I would see as probably the 80% conformity here where I am. I can't speak for other parts of the country, but from what I understand, it's become fairly uniform in compliance. And I will push the edges of this thing. I will not wear a mask anywhere that I absolutely don't have to and a place that I absolutely don't have to go to. And those are choices that we make.
Sure.
And that's just the masking situation. The social distancing becomes even more vexing because, well, I'll tell you, let me share a story. Yesterday, we went out of town to attend a celebration with people whom we didn't know. They were people that we were just meeting for the first time through a family member, through my son. We showed up in the city and went to these people's home. It was an outdoor festivity. Not a single soul out of, I would say, 35, 40 people there was masked,
Great.
were social distancing, were worried or concerned in any way at all about any of this. It was like somebody threw you into a time warp and you were back to 2019 again. And in that moment, I'm like, I'm not a big party person. I'm moderately social. But I was like, this is to be celebrated. There's normalcy in the midst of all this madness. And there are people who pretty clearly, for whatever their reasons are, aren't buying into all of this madness.
Yeah, it's great. And when I see the pictures of people in Berlin and other places, massive amounts of people coming out and protesting this stuff, this is what needs to happen everywhere. And beyond the protests, because a lot of times protests are just ignored once they leave the, any type of media that's reporting on them, which is very limited these days. We need to take a stand in other ways. And for instance, today I was at the gym and I was thinking, is about 90% of these people who are working out are wearing masks, and even trying to breathe hard through a mask, and I'm just dumbfounded by that. And then the guy the owner of the company, it's a chain of gyms in Las Vegas here. He comes on the screen. He says, in order for us to keep this place open, you just got to wear your mask. All of you got to wear your mask. If you can't breathe, slip it down for a little bit, but then slip it back up. Just nonsense. So I was thinking to myself, what should be happening is this guy and all the other gym owners, all the other business owners need to be filing class action lawsuits immediately, just for starters, and then just start a massive campaign, against these people who are trying to enforce it. I mean, that's what should happen if people actually know their rights.
Yeah, I've been waiting. I predicted months ago that we would see lawsuits. We see some.
Yeah, there are some for sure.
Yeah, there's one that was filed in the state of Massachusetts that looks like it has legs, mainly because it was formulated correctly. You've had David Martin on before, Dr. David Martin.
Yep.
And David and I have talked about this in the background because Pennsylvania was one of the first states where we saw a lawsuit. This was probably in early April. And this lawsuit was actually filed into the United States Supreme Court, where it was reviewed by the Supreme Court justice in charge of making determination. And unfortunately, the formulation of the case itself did not go to the heart of the matter, and the language in it was very poorly placed. Understanding how law works is in itself an art, and I get that.
Oh, yeah.
If you look at the decision that the Supreme Court rendered, and this was probably March or April, on behalf of LGBT rights in the workplace under Title VII, what you will see there in what shocked people were conservative justices that decided in favor of the minority of the plaintiffs in that case, as accepting the fact that sex determination under Title VII was had to do with gender and sexual orientation. And people were quite flummoxed by that and going, did the conservatives sell us out? But Chief Justice Roberts spoke to that when he said, when you bring me a case which is actionable, when you give me a case upon which we can decide, we will decide on the side of justice. And I thought that was hugely enlightening, the way the case was decided, the way the opinion was written, and the fact that the conservatives felt betrayed by their justices for actually doing their job and deciding in favor of what the law says, rather than following partisan politics. So as an example of that is that we need better writers of lawsuits right now. We need lawyers who know how to formulate lawsuits that are actionable based on civil rights and based on constitutional rights violations.
Well, I think also a lot of it's based on, case history. At least that's what I've seen in the court system. And I've not seen people with much success talking about constitutional rights because most of the courts are equity courts and they're, that whole thing with admiralty law and all that kind of stuff. It's mostly about contract law and things like that. So it's tough to bring a constitutional argument unless you can, morph that particular court into an Article 3 court, which is, I've never seen anybody really be able to do that. But definitely, I'm sure there are attorneys out there who don't like what's going on. They understand the imposition on all of us and want to do something about it. So I'm hoping that a lot more of them will step forward that are qualified, as you said, to actually bring something that's actionable. I know there's an attorney firm here in Las Vegas that is suing the governor, and I actually sent them David Martin's material, and they responded back and thanked me for it, which I was surprised. But I'm hoping that their case is going to proceed. But again, you never know what, until you see the actual complaint or of the lawsuit. You don't really know which angle they're taking. And, we need to find some that might have success that would be duplicated in other places. But then again, the downside to that is that we've got so many of these judges who are bought and paid for, just like the politicians.
Yeah, here in Pennsylvania, there's been 2 decisions made by our state Supreme Court, both in favor of the executive orders being enforced through the state health department and the governor. And in both cases, they almost completely, without going into the details of the cases, they basically had to contradict one decision in order to make the other. And in that case, what that is these are liberal. And look, I'm not politically biased. I used to be a Democrat, and back when Democrat meant something, and a Republican back when I maybe thought it meant something. So I don't lean to either party. What I'm saying is that the liberal Democrats have lined up with this program in ways that are simply, let's just say, too numerous to be convenient, that the agenda that's being played out, while it has a lot of goals, a lot of tactics, a lot of subtext to it, is in one sense a game of political one-upsmanship at a time when they are desperately trying to regain power from the sitting president of the United States.
That is absolutely undeniable. I mean, we're seeing it. And then we get hints of their agenda, which, I think many of us feel that really is just falling in line with the whole UN Agenda 2030 or 2021 to 2030, whatever you want to call it, because of the fact that they're introducing all of these ancillary laws into the next so-called Relief Act, for getting people money. And when you look at the laundry list of stuff they're putting in there, this is all socialist, UN, globalist, agenda stuff.
Yep. Yes, it is agendized in that way because wherever the nexus of control for this operation came from, in terms of how it was implemented, it was done in a very interesting way because it was not done through the normal means that we would expect to see what I will just call a scaled military operation, minus the military, interestingly enough.
Mm-hmm.
But it is as weaponized, it is as strategically plotted, and it is as methodical as the invasion of Normandy Beach. In terms of how it's being conducted, it's very much a military operation. Absolutely. And I guess that goes into the Rockefeller document. And for some reason, I can't remember the name of that document at the moment. But I know your listeners have probably seen it because it's been out there for a while.
Sure.
But that was the skeletal aspect of it. Who put the fine points onto this in terms of pulling together what was in the background going on for 17 years between CDC, NIAID, and University of Chapel Hill, North Carolina, into the Wuhan Institute, was the perfect moment in which to launch the coronavirus. And I mean, all of that is traceable, all of it's documented, all of it can be seen. The statements have been made out there. David Martin has talked about how they had to literally violate their own rules in order to arrive at a taxonomy that made COVID-19 itself a novel virus, thus the patented, trademarked COVID-19 mantra that was woven into the collective psyche. I mean, pile-driven into the psyche of human beings across the world. This is a massive campaign of psychological operations on a scale we've not seen before.
Exactly. I mean, there's no doubt about it. This was highly planned, highly coordinated on a worldwide scale, which we've never seen. I always think back to the beginnings of Nazi Germany, and they're using a lot of the same exact tactics now, but it's not just one country now. This is a worldwide effort. And since you bring that up, I'm very curious. And I always ask this question because it makes me wonder, and I don't know if anybody really has the answer, but what's really behind all this stuff? I mean, we see the talking heads, the politicians, the Soroses and the Gates and all these other people, but really, where is the real impetus of this? Because obviously the goal is world domination and world control by a small group of people.
I guess some people have referred to this as a reset. And given over the last few years, how alternative researchers have plumbed into Tartaria and some of the ancient historical timelines of resets and civilizations that were taken offline, it's actually a very good way of looking at it because, and I said this in a couple of my shows, they don't have a problem taking down their own systems. In fact, this is exactly, if you go back historically and look, this is basically how Freemasonry works in terms of, if you went back and looked at the construction of cathedrals, they would parallel construct and tear down cathedrals almost at the same time. It was basically excavation and construction in one parallel operation. So in a sense, what they're doing, I believe, is they are parallel excavating the topography of the present system and its component parts, while at the same time building a new infrastructure, most of which is strategically pointed towards non-physical, non-human, non-analog. So in other words, one of the things that I noticed very quickly, especially with hashtag lockdown, was how pervasive technology became in this. It was like overnight, Grandma woke up and discovered that she needed to know how to use Zoom. And companies were freaking out. And I know this because I was looking online because I'm a software trainer. And I actually considered, well, if I'm going to be locked down, maybe I can make some money at this. So I was looking at the demand for people who required training in software packages, specifically video conferencing, video editing, and packages related to being able to communicate effectively in a digital format. And what struck me was how overnight the tech industry suddenly matured into this blossoming flower of a beautiful woman ready to be plucked. And now wasn't the skinny, nerdy, knock-kneed girl in the corner anymore. It was like, holy crap, this is as real as anything we ever saw in the industrial era. In fact, it's more real. And yet we can't touch it. I mean, you can touch your computer, but the merging of software into our reality is something that I've talked about for years. It's something that I've warned about, how pervasive it can be. And I've also warned that we would get to the place where we would eventually wind up biologically morphing into the digital field if we weren't vigilant about it. And that's what I started to see.
Yeah, absolutely. And the dangling of the carrot, in front of us of technology. It's so great, and it is great in a lot of ways. I mean, just think of the communication ability that we have now that we never had before. And that's very positive, that part of it. But the downside, of course, is that we become totally dependent on technology. We become addicted to technology. And then, that just puts us on the road, towards this whole transhumanist agenda, which none of us want, but ideally, I guess if you're a world controller and you're living the high life and you're rich and powerful and you love it, and you just don't want these upstart people to ever rebel or do anything to upset your power structure, then probably the best thing to do is lock them down into this technocratic system where you can totally control them to the nth degree.
Certainly in the case of millennials who grew up with this technology, they were already primed to accept a world that you and I growing up in analog world. I mean, the most real thing in the world, what was it to you? Was it maybe your guitar? Think about something you can touch, something you can play. There's strings, there's dials. You plug it into an amplifier, you crank it to 11. That's a real object doing real work in analog. Mm-hmm. Think about the virtual world now, and I've dabbled in both of these, of electronic music, where you literally, the only thing you need is a keyboard, and barely even that anymore. And you can plug in VSTs and all kinds of nifty little plugins and play music that we couldn't have dreamt of 30 years ago. And all of that's great. It's creative. My issue with it is the other side of this is the gamers who have lived in virtual worlds since probably they were 9 or 10 years old in a lot of cases. And I know a lot of people like this who now understand the world as not necessarily the world of dirt and soil and grass and animals and people, but the virtual world inside of a screen that they interact with in a way that is actually rewiring their brain synapses in real time. Their entire motor functions are geared to the speed of CPU processors. And see, that's where you eventually get to the place where you can begin to pull human beings into what we've called on my show, the shows that I did with Dr. Shamil Asher, the simulacrum, which is basically a virtual world which supplants, replaces, and operates instead of anything engaged with the real world. The biological unit on the other side of the screen is simply a brain that is functioning in virtual worlds.
Oh, yeah. Okay, Randy, once again, we're up against the break, so we're going to take a short pause right here. You're listening to Inside the Matrix with Randy Maugans, our special guest. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back, everybody, to Inside the Matrix with our special guest today, Randy Maugans. And before the break, we were talking about the sort of elite, I hate calling them elite, I don't know what to call them, the psychopath maniacs that are controlling this world are trying to steer us in the direction of transhumanism. And we're really we've gone a long way down that road. And Randy, is there even a happy medium between utilizing technology and not giving up our humanity? I mean, there should be, certainly, right?
Up until this present era, where we began to see the onslaught of digital, technology was fairly clear cut. And I mean, we had a very good example of this growing up in the world post-World War II, because we understood what the atom was. And we understood, at least from what we were given to understand about World War II, that atom could blow up two cities. Oh, let's see. Oh yeah, that's right. We're celebrating the anniversary of that, aren't we? So you could blow up Hiroshima and Nagasaki with an atom, or you could boil water with an atom, which is what we ill-advisedly also did with nuclear power plants. The point being that one was preferable to the other, and that somewhere in the middle of that equation, the atom itself was neutral. It's simply part of the fabric of our physical reality.
Right.
Technology itself is modeled on the analog world, but then it goes one step further and begins to pull us into it, something we did not have before. So the concept of immersive technology, when I was growing up, would have been 4-channel surround sound stereo was pretty frickin' immersive.
Oh, yeah.
The early IMAX theaters, pretty immersive. Certain types, Viewmasters. Anybody remember Viewmasters? 3D circular slides that you put in a little thing and you look down.
I
And
love those things.
That was immersive. Now immersive is putting things on your body and goggles on and sensors and haptic devices and hooking into a device and going into worlds that pull you into a hyper reality so alluring that some people don't want to come back from it anymore. And frankly, there's a small sector of people out there who don't, for the most part. And that is the danger that we have, is that we are being subsumed by technology rather than technology serving us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is definitely the direction that they're pushing us in. We've got a question from the chat for you, Randy. The Florida chick, our good friend, is asking, I am interested to know if Randy can speak to the worldwide social control agenda of the Red Papacy. I suspect the veil over the Vatican Bank is a major player in hiding the money that funds protests, political revolutions in so many countries, including the USA.
The term Red Papacy it's not something that I'm overly familiar with. I will say that, for the time that I've done research in this field, pretty much every time you come across something that smells, once you go deep enough, you're going to begin pulling up the Vatican, which we have to somewhat separate from the Roman Catholic Church, but they are adjunct to each other. And the fact that they enjoy the privilege of being able to hide money, so-called ethically, by virtue of being being a church, a government, a nation state, a bank, and in fact an entire embedded society all located in that little tiny basilica, there's a lot of room there for all kinds of things to occur. As to, I'm rereading the question again. The veil over the Vatican is a major player in hiding money. They always have been. That was their function during World War II as well. And not just money. Even bigger than money is what money buys, or what desires come from the kind of money that you're talking about. And what it really is about is the networking of human beings, specifically children and women, but even more, quite frankly, the trafficking of human beings en masse for purposes of what we will just say is the harvesting of vital energy. That's the real currency that I see, and that's the one that people can't wrap their heads around yet. So I don't know if that answered the question. If it didn't, bring it back up in front of us, because I'm looking at chat. That may not be as specific as the listener would like, but yeah, I mean, the Vatican's always going to be behind it because they have their tentacles in everything.
They absolutely do. And, we've known for a long time historically, you've got in London, you've got what they refer to as the city, as the financial center. The Vatican there's the three centers. There's the Vatican, there's the city in London, and of course Washington D.C. is the military arm, but they all kind of cross each other too, because there's financial things go on in Washington and New York and places like that as well. But there's that triangle of control in the world, and it's always an interesting question to try and figure out who's pulling whose chain. And who's the ultimate chain puller? Are we talking about aliens? And of course, that is a broad term that doesn't really mean a whole lot. Are we talking about extraterrestrials, terrestrials below the surface of the Earth? I mean, what are we really talking about? And that's always something that fascinates me, is trying to figure that out. And I don't know if anybody really has the answer. It's something that we should definitely try and figure out, because if you can't figure out who's pulling the strings, how do you stop them from pulling the strings? It's just one of those conundrums. And obviously these people are highly intelligent. They, at some point, designed the system of control that we have, with money. Money is a fantastic control system. And of course, I say it every week, and I'm going to say it again. Human beings have two major flaws. One is that they can be bought and display selective relative morals. And the other one is that they can be easily programmed. Unless you are a person who has put in the time and the energy to figure out who you are as a being, and once you have that knowingness, you really can't be programmed. But not enough of us have gone down that road. And, we are flawed beings because of that, and we're subject to the manipulation that we see going on today, and that's been amped up this year quite a bit.
Let me go back to something you said earlier, when you said it's the puzzle you want to solve, that three-sided puzzle, that equation. If you look at that symbolically, and this is actually the hidden meaning behind, like, the Trilateral Commission. Mm-hmm. We think it's a three-sided puzzle, and what do? They give you puzzles to solve. A lot of what happens in intake into military intelligence programs is puzzle solving. In fact, a great deal of it is puzzle solving. What really goes on inside of government mind control programs is estimating and programming the ability to not only solve puzzles, but create puzzles. That's sort of war game theory. Mm-hmm. It's also part of the cryptocracy behind the puzzle palace. So they give us puzzles to solve. This has been my problem. As much as I love the world of alternative media, and I go back to Art Bell and William Cooper as probably two people who influenced me to go in this direction. Mm-hmm. What drives me insane is the level of astuteness that's invested in solving puzzles that have been given to us as puzzles to solve, rather than looking behind the puzzle and asking the bigger questions. That's hard. That's really freaking hard. It's what I'm trying to do with my current radio show, my current podcast series, is to really peel it back from the layer of who are they, what are they doing to us, and what can we do about it? Because those are all passive positions. Yeah. So how do we get to active positions?
Exactly. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit there, right? That we can just grab. There's we can blame this person, blame that political party, blame this group or that group, or this country, or there's a zillion different directions we can go. It's all the Illuminati's fault. It's all the bankers' fault, and of course, a lot of them are the one and the same. But it's the aliens' fault. We don't know. We just flat out don't know, and that's something that always gets to me, is that we don't have access to that information. And your point is so well taken, that they constantly give us puzzles to solve. It's like, oh, look at this shiny object over here. and analyze this shiny object. And then, of course, when we all jump down that rabbit hole, then they throw us another little shiny object and go, hey, no, wait, this is the new shiny object that everybody needs to be looking at, because as long as you're looking over there, we're going to be over here in another place doing something else. And it's a constant game, that's being played on us, against us. And gosh, it would be great to find out who's behind it.
Let's look at COVID from that viewpoint. Mm-hmm. And the stream of data that has come forward with COVID, quite honestly, not a lot has been hidden. The documents have been there for years concerning both the weaponization of various viruses, as well as the concomitant, which is the emerging desire for universal vaccine. Those two form the equation that we can operate from COVID with. Once you understand this is a weaponized virus, this is difficult because viruses by definition are not easily defined. And the science behind them is something that requires you to pull into the theory of genetics and DNA and understand how a virus fractions off of RNA proteins and how it is way beyond the common person. In a lot of cases, most doctors are not educated in this to the degree that they can analyze things.
True.
But the thing about COVID behind the scenes is simply this. What is it? How many people do you know that really were sick? I'm not dismissing the fact that COVID exists, and I'm not dismissing the fact that people have gotten sick and people have died. And in some places, in numbers enough to express concern. Having said that, it is a virus. It is like any other biological element. It does not necessarily need to infect you, and in most cases it doesn't, nor does it need to kill you, unless you have pre-existing conditions and you are frankly probably close to what they call end-of-life cycle, and you have mitigating circumstances. The truth of the matter is that the numbers indicate 90% of people who have COVID either are asymptomatic or they become symptomatic at some level, anywhere from mid-extreme to very sick, but they recover. So what we're looking at is a disease that is attacking our bodies on the immunological level. And the simple question you have to ask is, what can I do about this? You have two choices. You have the choice of the allopathic medicine, which says, well, we'll wait till you get sick and then we'll give you one of our vaccines, or we'll give you hydrochloroquine. The hydrochloroquine is probably, because of its long-term use, more efficacious. We understand it better. It's also very controversial because of that. But there's another part of this equation we're not looking at, and that is the long-term strategy of practicing good homeopathic health practices every day, of keeping your immune system up, of not letting yourself get run down. And I'm saying this as somebody who has done that very, very, very thing. I got sick because I left my body run down. I did not take care of myself. And I can tell you that once you begin to practice even a tiny little bit of diligence in this area, the results are actually very quick in coming around. You suddenly develop, you don't get cold as easily. You suddenly develop that to whatever level you were at, you begin to come back with a bit more energy. And because people aren't educated in taking care of themselves, they've been sold the promise of medicine that, oh, if you become sick, we have a pill for you or a shot for you. And so nothing is prophylaxis in terms of how we do medicine. It's all based on curative, which is allopathic's use of pharmacological substances, chemistry, and the physical sciences rather than metaphysical sciences, which begin to show you the vital body and how that operates in concert with certain things that you can do organically. These are the discussions that are not being held publicly.
Oh yeah, because there's not a lot of profit in taking care of yourself and building a strong immune system. Unfortunately, so much a part of this is built on pharmaceutical companies making massive profits, and we've gotten to the point where there's very little discussion of getting sunshine, getting exercising, and doing the homeopathic remedies that you're referring to. There's very little discussion of that anywhere except offline, off mainstream media. What the program is giving us is there are only two solutions: a long-term drug like hydroxychloroquine that's been around forever and shown. A lot of people say it's very effective, or you get this virus, or vaccine rather. And if you don't get the vaccine, guess what? We're going to come out with a program that if you don't have the vaccine, you're not going to be able to travel. You're not going to be able to get a job, and introducing the social credit score from communist China in the back door. We're going to slip it right in there because that's ultimately what that, that sort of vaccine passport is going to give you. That whole privilege that you thought you had in being a free human being.
Yeah, I understand that that's what they want to do.
Yeah.
They have a number of difficulties, even on the level of law, in terms of making that happen. And it is up to the people, and by that I mean the 3 to 5% who actually have synaptic responses capable of processing this.
Yeah.
It is up to we, the people, this tiny little group that reality really pivots on, that we be vigilant and that we be prepared to fight them on their own ground, which is going to be in the courts and in the public discourse. And this is why they're grabbing social media platforms like crazy right now. That's why Facebook, Twitter, and all the other mainstream platforms are so vigorously slapping down people who are posting things that are alternative to the views that they are promoting through the COVID-19 program. Mm-hmm. But we have been successful to the degree that I think we've woken some people up. And I also think that when you see things like frontline doctors standing up, making videos, getting the videos taken down, and then people posting and reposting, I know that sounds like keyboard warrior stuff, but quite frankly, it's important because it puts what we're doing in a lot of cases is we are placing this into the field. We're relying on the field effect, which is nonverbal. It's non-communicative in the way we understand it. But this is actually how the evolution of human consciousness itself works, is that the energetics begin to come into the system via this almost like etheric communication. So we put our thoughts out there, and our thoughts are small, and they don't have much amplitude, but they're still there. They ripple. They bounce around, they hit receptive targets, and those targets amplify it. And pretty soon what you begin to create is a mesh network of human energy and human thought that begins to amplify that vibration. And that's the part of this we cannot let go of. However you look in terms of feeling like you're outflanked, outspent, and outmanned, the truth of the matter is that the hopes of this world in terms of advancing consciousness and not allowing them to implement these type of programs exists because we exist. And I can't stress that enough.
The collective consciousness rules. Yeah, if that is truly where it's at as far as I'm concerned, because that's why they spend so much time and effort programming us to think the way they want us to think, because that will steer the events of the world ultimately, right? And yeah, I totally agree with you on that. And that's an area they don't really want us to put too much thought into.
That's actually what this is all about. If you want to know what the point of COVID-19 is, real quick, because I know we're bumping up against the hour here. COVID-19 is the war on human consciousness. It's designed to smack down the rising energetic of human consciousness that has been rippling forward for probably the last 40 years, but amplified greatly since 2012, and
Yes.
greatly amplified over the last 2 years. This is a war on human consciousness. It is the
And
Third World War as well.
oh, absolutely. You're spot on as far as I'm concerned. And then one big clue there is that they are desperately trying to stop people from praying in groups. I find that fascinating.
Yeah. They don't want you to pray. They don't want you to meditate in groups. They don't want you interacting in the field, the heart field. If you go look at the Heart Math Institute, they have the numbers up there on what the radius field of your heart energy is. It's, oh, wait a minute, 6 feet? Gosh.
Stay away. Yeah, don't resonate with somebody who has a good heart and good intentions, because you might be influenced by them somehow, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. That's fascinating. Yeah, you totally hit it right on the head. That's really where this is at. Too many people are seeing the game and waking up, and still, it doesn't have to be a large percentage. A lot of people refer to the American Revolution as being actually implemented by 3 or 4% of the population, and the rest have nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
So, your
I
thoughts
think years
count.
ago it was Daniel Pinchbeck who came out and talked about the tipping point, and he estimated the tipping point to be between 3 and 5%.
I really
Well,
like that. I like that because that really gives me more hopium than a lot of
We
the
don't need
stuff out there.
numbers. Numbers are nice.
Yeah.
We don't need the numbers. Universe has decreed this is the time when humans will go into another level. That's been spoken into this world by humans who want it to happen, and by the creative forces that want it to happen. It doesn't matter at this point. We don't need the numbers. It's occurring.
I absolutely love that, and it makes me feel all warm and fuzzy knowing that. And so that is the new normal I want to experience and move towards. So, yeah, that makes a lot more sense, and it gives us an opportunity to have that influence. And people need to understand that there is that energetic field out there. All right, we're up against a break. We're listening to Inside the Matrix with our guest, Randy Maugans. We'll be right back. Stick around with us. All right, welcome back, everybody. And just wanted to remind you, if you have a question for us, feel free to pop it in the chat or even give us a call if you want to. We'll be happy to talk with you and answer your questions and keep the conversation going along those lines. Before the break, we were getting into the whole idea of collective consciousness. And, I know myself, it's so easy for me to get caught up in the puzzles, as you say, Randy, or all the little dramas that are going on, with Trump and Pelosi and Soros and all that kind of stuff. And it's great to be reminded that we need to keep that perspective that we are very powerful beings just in our thought process and in our prayer process, which is just, to me, is just intensified thought. But that's a great thing to be mindful of.
I think one of the most important things to remember is, and I've had this conversation a number of times, we're not smaller than our enemies. We have chosen, by virtue of being in this, you could call it the construct, the matrix. I mean, you're inside the matrix. The construct, we have chosen to be in vessels which are of limited consciousness. And I think one of the great takeaways that I got probably in my late teens, early 20s, had to do with something that I have to attribute to entheogens, altered conscious states. It's difficult to talk about this because it brings into the equation something that a lot of people object to, and I get that. And I'm not in favor or pushing entheogens. I'm using this as an example to state that once you go outside of normal consciousness, you become acutely aware that all that exists in physicality is not all there is, and that the mind itself is actually capable of scaling to higher levels of consciousness. Whether you do that with an entheogen, or you do it with a meditative practice, or you do it through extreme sports, or any other methodology that works for you, once you begin to escape limitations, you unseal the possibilities of who you are. This was exactly what the government was trying to do with programs that it instituted under Project Talent, MK Ultra, Monarch, all of the alphabet letter agencies in the military, super soldier programs, so-called secret space program. These were all designed to locate and then control the scalability of human ability, both physically, mentally, and psychically. And because we've chosen to be in limited consciousness, and because of the hypnosis of this world, which is reinforced by the control grid itself, most people cannot reach the point where they understand that our enemy is not bigger than us, but there is an enemy. We want to humanize everything. So a lot of what has happened in what's called prophecy or eschatology, and I was in Christianity for years, and fundamentalism, so I understand where it comes from. First off, we take God and we make God like a person. So he's like this white-haired, angry guy on the throne that's throwing down thunderbolts and going, burn them all. And the other side of it, we want to make the devil the same way. So we humanize both God and devil, and then we think, there's the Antichrist. It's the 666. Look, it's emblazoned on his forehead. That surely must be him. And that's... When I was in Christianity, when I was on Christian radio in the early part of the 2000s, I called it comic book theology, because it really was. There was a guy named Jack Chick who did all these comic books, Christian comic books. And it became this thing about comic book theology. We have reduced into human terms something that cannot be understood in human terms. That's what you would call God, creator, universe, the ineffable, whatever terms you use to describe that. We want to scale that to us. The reverse is true. We need to scale ourselves to begin to grasp exactly what these forces are that work against us, and understand that we chose this. We chose to be in limited consciousness, and that we operate in this way, much like you operate when you're in boot camp and you're down doing crunches on the ground and squats until you have a washboard stomach and huge bulging muscles. In the human sense, what we're doing is we're exercising ourselves in limited consciousness, while at the same time training ourselves, ideally, to rescale consciousness out to understand that these forces that we call good and evil are no different than the poles on a magnet. And this disturbs people. Because all of a sudden you're going, wait a minute, are you saying there's no evil? And I'm going, well, you can call it that. These are oppositional forces. We live in the drama of a system that weaponized our reality against us for control. The human aspect of it, whether you call it the Vatican, the Illuminati, any terms that you want to give it, they themselves serve something bigger. And they seem to understand what it is because they fear it enough that they'll give up what you would call their soul in order to worship this, to honor it, to obey it, and to basically implement its programs. But the implementation of the programs is simply the knee-jerk reactionism of people who are damaged, mind-controlled, and frankly, not capable of scaling out of their own limited consciousness. And it's very hard for me to communicate this without stratifying people, because we go back to it, I do it. We go back to this concept that all these forces are arrayed against us. Look at us, puny humans, and how we've been enslaved and whipped and beaten and trafficked and sexually abused. And all of that is true. All of it's true. And I have nothing but compassion I've had my fair share of crap in my life, and I get it. I get the trauma. I get the years of depression, anxiety that people go through as they are trying to recover from what was done to them. But at some point in the human drama, we have to break the major equation, just like what we talked about in the previous hour about the puzzles they give you to solve. They also give you the trauma that you have to deal with. Mm-hmm. And that's what they're doing again with COVID. COVID is a mass trauma program. By locking people down, by disempowering them, by forcing them to mask, by forcing them to social distance, to walk lockstep with lines on the floor through a supermarket that begins to look more and more like the security line at an airport, they have stooped you down and once again constricted your reality to the very basics of, oh gosh, I need to get groceries or go to the pharmacy, and I got to put on a mask, and I've got to kowtow to the edicts and directives of whatever authority has told you have to do these things. And the consciousness rise comes when you go, wait a minute, none of this makes sense. They've deliberately obfuscated it. They've given you contradictory information. Deliberately. Mm-hmm. You can go and find Fauci, and he says, nobody should be wearing a mask. And then he goes, everybody should be wearing a mask. And you have tons of experts, and I'm trained every 2 years in OSHA. And because of what I do for a living, which includes the handling of certain types of materials, I do use certain types of protective gear under certain circumstances. So anybody that's trained understands the particulates that are captured by these different types of masks, including the all-popular N95, which is great for capturing particulates, but unfortunately, you breathe out unfiltered into the environment because they're designed to be used in a contamination field. People don't understand how these things work. So all of this together is this constant operation of dividing people against each other, maskers, anti-maskers, people who don't social distance, you don't wash your hands enough. It's to reduce consciousness to a very bare level and to keep you in survival mode. That's what we're fighting against. But the enemy itself is something that sits outside of the system. You can call them the archons. I use that term because I tend to kind of come at this from a Gnostic standpoint, but really it's been talked about as the Watiko. There are other ways of labeling this as something that is evil on an ontological level. But the evil itself is simply the force-counterforce play inside of this field that we're in that's a result of constricted consciousness. I hope that wasn't too wordy.
Oh, no, that was awesome. I'm just sitting here nodding my head over and over going, yeah, that's exactly it. And, I had my own, I had a series of psychedelic experiences starting at age 18, which I can totally relate to what you're saying, because you realize that there is way more to existence, even in the Matrix, than we're able to perceive normally with our senses. And also, I can recall experiencing this feeling of divine love that I didn't know existed. I was in this state where I felt completely loved and completely surrounded by the most amazing energy. I didn't want to leave. I didn't want it to be over. I was just like, okay, this is how it could be somehow, some way. But most people don't get those experiences unless they are more adventurous, and I would say most people are not, because for many reasons, not probably because they've been programmed to not experiment with anything that goes outside the mainstream, because you'll be shamed by your own friends and family if you do. But, it's a choice, and it always brings me back to thinking about how this is a spiritual school. And before we come here, There's differing schools of thought on this. Some people say, we get sucked into this system, that is run by some beings that traps our souls and just keeps spitting us out back into another body. After we leave one, we go through this little assembly line thing and come popping back out of another body. There's that school of thought. And then there's another one that says, like the book, The Life Between Lives. Trying to think of
Newton's
Michael
book.
Newton.
Dr. Michael Newton, yeah.
Yeah, where he talks about how we go to this place where it's very much a school, and your energy field is what people see, and when they see your field, they know exactly the state of your consciousness. And it's a fascinating thing. So I tend to think that that's what reality is that we consciously choose to come into a world or a matrix like this to experience. And I really think we're testing our mettle, our spiritual mettle. We can come in here, we can get sucked into all of the, very crass human weaknesses. We can go down paths of disparity and addiction and trauma. And some of it's going to be our own doing, and some of it's going to be what other people have done to us that we had no say in and no responsibility for whatsoever, other than that we were there and we were used. So then it becomes the challenge, really, of recognizing that that's what's going on, and then finding a way to take the emotional charge off of those horrible experiences. And that's no easy undertaking.
Not at all. No. It's a whole field of study in itself, trauma recovery. Mm-hmm. And I know a lot of people, and I've been through it myself. I still go through it myself. Spend a lifetime discharging the energy that came from all that. But what I've noticed with a lot of the people who I've been exposed to, and even my experiences in my life, has been the very fact that we went through that trauma, that we survived, knowing many people did not survive these programs. Many people did not survive sexual abuse or other forms of torture. Mm-hmm. Suicide rates are very high. But the fact that you're a survivor in itself is very empowering. And sure. Most of us have gained knowledge as a result of this, especially people who came out of programs, because they were basically programmed with knowledge above the normal intellectual level of basic education, even college education, because basically they were schooled in elements of the esoteric, the magical, the psychic arts, the things that nobody's teaching our children, but we should be teaching our children. Children should be trained in all of this from a very young age, because you're at your most magical between birth and the age of about 3 years old, when you begin to become programmed by the matrix construct itself. Mm-hmm. But some of us retain that, and some of us retain that. We all retain it. We just simply are not able to bring it to the surface and empower it again, but we all retain it on some level. And when you talked about that state you were at as a result of the experiences of feeling totally loved, that's what we should feel like. Yes. If we can access that mind state, even a few minutes a day, it's enough of a bump that we can go through the crap that we've got to go through. And we can also push that out into the field as well. Because that's a big part of this, is what we do logically and out of response to traumas, we shut down. Whereas the human heart field itself, amplified into an environment, becomes a harmonic onto which other people will rise. And you've seen this in social situations where somebody walks into a room and they're magnetic. They have a presence. They have the ability to elevate the room. They draw people to themselves. Yes. And the reason they do that is because whether they know it or not, they are operating in a charisma that comes from that magnetic heart center, and they're basically they're pushing 50,000 watts of broadcast right out into the room, which is awesome.
That is awesome. And it's so much fun when you physically encounter people like that. And it's just so uplifting. And as you said earlier, they don't want us to be in those fields, and they want us to socially distance so that we don't get in somebody's field. But I think some people our fields are much bigger than that, than 6 feet. And they, really extend their energy out quite a ways. And of course
your energy body actually broadcasts out in a range between 1,200, 1,800, even up to 2,400 square feet.
Wow.
What you would call the Merkaba or energy body. Mm-hmm. That has the ability to have a presence in something pretty close to the size of a small to medium-sized house. So we have the ability to project presence at that level.
Absolutely. And, I always think about how powerful just a smile is. What does a smile do? Let's say you're in a store and you're in a line and you're impatient and you're having to wait and you don't want to wait. And then somebody stands next to you and they look at you and they just give you this big old smile. It changes everything. And a smile is more than just a facial expression. It's actually a projection of really great energy. That's my experience anyway. And I love to see when people smile. And that's one of the things that I miss most is that, we walk around with these stupid masks on. You can't tell a person's expression. You can tell a little bit by their eyes, but it's still, it's very disheartening.
What the masks are doing is two things. They're preventing that. They're preventing both receptive and transmission of that human energy, that radiance that comes from the locus of the mouth and from the eyes as well, but it works in concert. Yes. And this is the mentality it's designed to install. Again, it's to push you down to the most basic level of survival so that you cannot impart any type of spiritual energy into the environment in which you're operating. Yep. It's so insidious how they calculated this in ways to bypass our logic. First off, if you just think about it, if you look at the history, and I've challenged the governor of this state online several times with, you keep claiming you have emergency powers under an act that was written in 1952, but you're not following the protocols that were followed in the 1950s and the 1960s, largely because of polio and smallpox, which were two diseases during that time that once they were diagnosed, they were quarantined. And quarantine in those days was basically done by quarantining the diseased person to their residence and basically putting a sign up so that people understood this is a quarantine. It wasn't a letter of shame. It was a means of protecting both the person who was ill and the public at large. Yes. They've done the reverse of that.
Yeah, they're quarantining the well people and anybody and everybody. And as you said earlier, this is trauma-based action here. Just like 9/11 was a huge traumatic event for humanity. And I don't care where you were in the world, if you heard about it, it was traumatic. And they depend on these kinds of traumatic events to keep us under control. And war is another one. Once we go to war somewhere and we're under that state of war and always the threat of war and the threat of this and that and promoting these riots, that's another trauma-inducing event, because you've got these people out there burning down businesses and it's the constant barrage of one trauma after another. And, I'm always repeating myself, but how bad does it have to get before you say, no, we're not taking this anymore? And apparently it's not bad enough yet. So I'm hoping we can get there and, keep our thoughts and prayers in that collective consciousness pool going strong and in the midst of all this.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the point of why we're talking.
Mm-hmm.
That's the point of why we're having
We
this
want to
conversation
put,
right
that's
now.
right. We want to put these ripples out there, and we're hoping that those of you who are in resonance with us will amplify these thoughts and put your own out there. And because, all human beings, it boils down to we want the same things. We want to be loved. We want to be respected. We want to be appreciated. We want to cooperate. We're compassionate beings. This is our nature, to be this way with others, and we want others to be that way with us. And unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at the school, it's just the opposite in most cases. Is that they don't want us coming together in those ways. They want us to be fighting each other. They want us to constantly be rooting for a team, taking a side. You're a Republican, you're a Democrat, you're a liberal, you're a conservative, when actually all of those different, thought process have validity to them in one way or another. Anyway, we're up against the break once again. Stick around with us. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back to Inside the Matrix, everybody, with our special guest, Randy Maugans. We're having a great conversation. At least we're enjoying the heck out of it, and I hope that all of you out there are as well. And again, I always encourage you to comment or call us if you want to. But anyway, I think it's so important for all. It should be maybe something that's taught to us as a young person in this world, that it behooves us to figure out who we are. And I say this often: know thyself is one of the greatest little catchphrases that you'll ever encounter, because when you really get down to the essence of what that means, it means that you realize who you are, that you are a divine being having an experience in this matrix, in these bodies, in this construct that we're in. And with that perspective, it helps to have that perspective. Now, if you really feel like, this is it, I came into this world, I only live once, and then it's all over, and then, that's not a really good way to go through things, because you're always going to be fearful of losing that life. You're going to be fearful of what happens to this one precious life that you have, and that's it.
Yeah. What we were talking about off the air as well. I mean, just let's fundamentally deal with the fact that, do you believe that you are on some level eternal? And that's the question you ask inside yourself.
Yes.
I can't answer that for anyone else, and I don't have the answer to give you based on some deity or belief system. But I will tell you, as somebody who's dealt with those questions from a very early age, that I've never come up empty on it. I'm like, there's something else beyond me, and there's something else beyond time and this present construct. I just know that. That's kind of written into something deeper inside of us, which, is, it's kind of encoded. It's encoded when you look at the cycles of time, the cycles of nature, the rings in a tree, that things have cycles and things have termination points, but that they also continue on, because energy is neither created nor destroyed, and consciousness, which I consider consciousness in the sense of the awareness of who we are within ourselves, relating to any type of externalization, whether it's a finite world or an infinite world. Our awareness of that is itself source code for what I call eternality or immortality.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that. That's a great
That
way
was
to
a
play.
thought dump.
Yeah, that was good. I like that a lot. It's easy for us to get bumped off a track, and I know I'm raising my hand and saying, "Yeah, I'm one of them." I know who I am. I really do. I know it at my core, but I can get bumped off the path too, and I can get distracted by all the shiny objects out there, and that's part of the experience here. But ultimately, we need to always come back to that core understanding of who we are.
So I guess, the best, if we look around right now and you see how they factionalize now. We're almost like looped back into some weird iteration of the 60s in terms of what's going on with BLM and Antifa in the streets and the riot action. But this time it's different. And what's different about it is the stratification, which says, I don't want to engage in the dialogue of racism. And unfortunately, this argument has no space that's not racist. I'm either supposed to, so let me put it this way. I'm supposed to apologize for my race, my gender, my sexuality, my socioeconomic class, all of the above. And I'm like, I don't identify with any of that. Anybody who knows me realizes I've torn everything in my life apart at some time or another, all of those areas. And as a result of it, I don't have heavy identifications with it. That I was born into a Caucasian body, a fairly Western European model, is, whatever. Did I choose it? Maybe. Does it serve me? Yeah, sometimes, other times, not so much. But it's the model that I'm driving. But it doesn't make it better, and it certainly doesn't change anything relative to what's really important, which is my heart and my spirit, and what I advance to you as a fellow human being. And we've lost that because they radicalized it, and then they weaponized it, and they put it in the street at the very moment when we were already afraid, we were already sick, and we were already quivering in our abodes in fear of this invisible enemy that was unleashed on us from an unknown assailant.
That's it. That's kind of like the ultimate fear, isn't it? Not only is it, everything about it is unknown. It's an invisible thing that's out there. It's invisible people who have unleashed it. And and fear is pretty invisible, but we don't see it, but we feel it because we're programmed to do that. And that's fascinating because they've hit us on so many levels now that this is really challenging. It's a spiritual challenge to say, look, dude, we're going to throw everything at you but the kitchen frickin' sink, and let's see where you end up, humanity.
I would prefer to operate on the standard of that which does not kill me makes me stronger.
Yeah.
And maybe you just need to adopt that attitude.
I like that. Conan.
I talk to people all the time. The man I had this conversation with yesterday shared with me 3 times he almost died, which is really common for people to do who have had that experience. It's like almost evangelical in zeal. People love, look at this. Look at my back. So I was run over by a truck. I went through a windshield. My car flipped 5 times. Whatever it is, they have reckoned their mortality. And the stories you'll hear from people, including some of my own stories, are that the human being's a hell of a lot tougher to kill than you would imagine from the fragility of our structure. We don't die easy. And people who have tried to commit suicide know that. You can axe your wrists open and sit there and bleed out. And there's some chance that even 3/4 low of blood, somebody's going to come along and save your ass, and you're not going to succeed at doing that. So we don't die easy, and there's a reason for that. We are resilient beyond our physicality. And when we stop to examine that, we realize the challenge that these so-called ruling elites, which are really just minions, foot soldiers of archonic Wetiko evil. That's all. This is just a giant looshing for fun and profit operation inside of a fishbowl.
Well put. That's it. That's the essence of the game that we're in. So Yeah, and I have to keep reminding myself to keep a sense of humor about it because it is so easy to fall into
But you
all
have
the,
to, that's the beautiful part of it. You laughed. That was your first response.
yeah,
That is the most human response we can have.
yeah,
There's two we can have. It's tears and laughter. And they both come from this place inside of us that's human. And they're valid, legitimate expressions that are powerful beyond what they do. Because it's a shared emotional response that's really a test of who's human.
yeah. That's it. And another thing I always question is that how many, and I have to ask you this. I don't know if I asked you before last time you were on, Randy, but how many beings that are parading as human are actually human in this world? And do you think we have NPCs in
Yeah.
placeholders type
Yeah,
people?
actually did a 2 hour presentation with Mark Gray on this last year.
Oh,
And it's on YouTube. You can look it up. Just look up NPCs in my name, and it'll come up. So the interesting thing about it was that I did research on it because I went, I can't just go on here and like talk out my posterior. I should actually have something that underpins this. So I go looking for things, and I was surprised by what I found, including the fact that the actual number of biological humans on this world sort of exceeds the statistical probability in terms of breeding habits of human beings in the 20th century, where you also had mass genocide programs that were taking out millions of people, like on continents like Africa and China, with one-child policy.
Russia.
And the U.S., where we long ago tanked and are way past replacement level. And so somebody's producing a whole hell of a lot of human beings, and it doesn't look like they're doing it naturally. So, like, what's going on with that? And I think the answer is that, first off, this giant gaslighting program that's COVID-19 sort of, once you can extend it a little bit, you realize that you're relying on information that you can't directly access. I don't know of anybody that has the ability to do a census on the entire world. I don't know that there's a reputable agency that has numbers that could present you with all of the documentation to prove that each one of these people exists. Is there a birth certificate? Do we have a blood type? Did we take DNA from them? Where were they born? When were they born? Where do they live? Where are they presently? All of that profiling, all of this granular data that they supposedly have the ability to harvest endlessly on all of these servers. Somehow you can't get a frickin' answer out of these people, either A, about the real facts about this virus they unleashed, or B, what are the real numbers on anything. It's all obfuscation. So I'm forced to deal with the logic that I can bring to my awareness and go, there probably aren't as many people in this world as we think there are. And out of that, I'm willing to accept that a fair amount of them are what you would call NPCs, background characters, sprites in a video game, or simply overlays into our reality contour to make it seem a little more stimulating and realistic in a hyper reality data stream. So the answer is yes.
You think there are NPCs? Yeah, I do too. And but I always come back to this picture that I saw of these orphan trains in the 1800s. And when we talk about Tartaria and the hidden history and things that, in case you don't know what I'm talking about, look up Tartaria or Tartarian Empire, and that's a whole other rabbit hole you can go down. But when you see things like the orphan trains, that there's pictures of literally hundreds or thousands of these orphans. Where the heck did they come from? And what caused them to be orphans? All these kinds of things really go through my mind. And when I think about the NPC thing and the whole manipulation of civilizations and resets and all, I mean, there's just so much to it.
Yeah, well, I think some of that lends itself because, and I love the Tartaria stuff. I've seen people get a little wacky over it. I think you have to step back from that a little bit and start to do pattern recognition. It's showing you something. Is it showing you again what they present it to be? Again, you're presented with a puzzle. What do you do with the puzzle? Well,
Right.
it's fun to analyze it. It's fun to take it apart. It may be a Rubik's Cube, and you may spend a lot of time with it.
Right.
But it may bring up some other questions that better serve you in terms of, this doesn't really look like the reality I understand, which kind of goes into the plasticity of what, quote, reality, unquote, itself may be. That, in fact, in any given period of time, a time frame, let's call it a time frame because that's video jargon, video
Right.
game jargon. So you have a time frame, and the time frame's running on the computer, and it shifts, but those who have studied time understand time is not linear. It is simply a construct within, I'm calling this now temporal substrates. That's the terminology that I'm grappling with, and that we may be on a sort of field where time substrates themselves shift, as I think they did in the eclipse in 2017, because I sort of witnessed that. And I witnessed the events that took place coming off of that. So if our reality is somewhat malleable, then the scenarios that are presenting to you could be any number of things other than simply, quote, the reset of civilizations. They could be vestigial civilizations from, we'll call it a timeline. I hate the term because I don't like the linearity of it. We'll call it that. We'll say that this was a dimensional shift that occurred in a specific period of time. We'll call that history. And then we'll say that this is a vestige of that. So we have these vestiges that show up, and they're anomalous, and they look like free energy platforms, and they look like advanced civilizations that existed in times that they shouldn't have existed, and technology that seems to migrate out of nowhere. And if you play with that in your head a little bit, you can get like totally sci-fi with it. I'm good with that because I think that's a great way to formulate some independent thinking. Again, let's challenge all of the assumptions.
Yeah.
And go, maybe what is really showing you is the malleability of what you consider to be your reality. And when we talked about the entheogen experience, which quite frankly, you can get the same thing by doing certain types of breathing exercises. You don't even need to take drugs. I can get very high off oxygen and start to look at these things from the standpoint of a multi-dimensional, multi-temporal construct that can flip frames very quickly. And your consciousness is entrained to one, and it struggles to keep up. And they want to do fast frames now. They want to fast frame this thing because they need to keep us on our tiptoes. They need to keep us unbalanced because the consciousness waves come in, and it's moving, and people are responding to it. Some of them are freaking out, but it's there. And just begin to look at this malleable reality from a different standpoint. I'm just proposing these as ideas, as thought concepts, so that if you think you're going crazy, great, go for it. Because completely crazy can be the place where you finally just collapse the entire illusion that you're in control of anything. Trust me, I've been there.
It's always great to question everything, because the truth will always come back around. It'll come through. It'll hold true. It'll be there. Truth can always withstand questioning and scrutiny, whereas the bullshit that we're constantly being bombarded with falls apart rather quickly, whether it's statistical numbers of scamdemic or whatever they're throwing at us. When you really question it and dig into it, it falls apart rather quickly. So, it's a choice. Everybody, we can go through this spiritual school we call life any way we want to do it. We can be sort of NPC people, just kind of go along to get along, just kind of go with the herd mentality, the herd group think. Or we can be one of these people that says, no, none of that makes much sense. And I'm going to, as you say, sci-fi this in a lot of different directions and see what I can come up with.
Yep. Let's just play with it. It's like silly putty.
Yeah.
Just pour it out and let's form it and shape it and go stamp it down on a piece of paper and pull it up and morph and distort that. And have a good time doing it.
And when you were talking about sort of morphing things, I always think about the Mandela effect and how that fits sort of right into all of this, right?
Yep. That's actually the subject of a podcast I put out yesterday. I talked about that. And I think that itself, when you look at the history of it, that came on the heels of 2012 as well. Yes. At a very time when we were talking about, if you remember the whole era of 2012, it was interesting. I did a lot of interviews that year, and there was two types of people. It was either ascension or it was complete Armageddon.
Yeah, and the end of the world.
And after December 21st, they kind of like, everybody was kind of like, gosh, is that all there is to the circus? Yeah. We're still here. We haven't been shredded. And damn it, where's my wings? Yeah. And you're going, okay. You clearly did what we told you not to do, not to get too literal with this, but there's definitely something going on.
And so, like it's 2000, when it was January 1st, 2000, and everything didn't blow up, and the computers still kept working.
Exactly, yeah. And I remember this because I was actually involved in an industry where they were doing Y2K mitigation, and I was like, this really isn't a big deal because most of these computers, they've been offline for years. There's a few critical systems. We can bring those up to speed. But they sold a lot of survival supplies. Entire industries were born in that period. And gosh, they make merchandise out of your fears, don't they?
Oh, yeah. I mean, they're wanting to make a killing on the whole vaccine thing. They're selling a zillion masks, and they're like you were referring to earlier. Now there's this all this offline stuff that are actually online, where you're remote and you have to learn new software, which is great for people like yourself who train others in that. But it's a whole different industry that's now profiting off of this. And, that's the way it always is. The same people, they want to make a buck off of anybody's misery they can. It's kind of like attorneys, So,
it's great. It is.
Oh my gosh, Randy. This always goes by so fast when we talk. We've only got a couple minutes.
Because I like bouncing this. I like coming on here and bouncing this with you, Jimmy.
Oh, I love it. I love it. So tell us where people can find you.
Oh gosh, I don't have a website of any real importance at the moment. You can go to offplanetradio.com. That'll navigate you somewhat, but it's the YouTube channel, which is YouTube. Just look up Off Planet Radio, Off Planet Media. And then I have a Patreon page where we're putting up the Eye of the Needle material and sort of collaboratively
I love that stuff. That's good
writing
stuff.
This book, hopefully. And that's patreon.com/my name, Randy Maugans. Omitting my name, Randy Maugans. Patreon.com/Randy Maugans. And, I'm not looking for donations. I'm looking for people who just want to invest in the intellectual game that we're playing here of trying to sort all this out.
Absolutely. And you're doing a great job, and we appreciate your great mind and your great heart. So thanks for being with us, Randy.
This platform. I love this.
Well, we hope to have you back on regularly. Anyway, for those of you out there listening, thank you for listening. Thank you for paying attention. Thank you for being great human beings. And we'll see you next week on Inside the Matrix. Take care, everybody.
This is Inside the Matrix, hosted by Jimmy Brent.
Who are we talking about?
Jimmy Brent. Live every Sunday, 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern. Exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network.
It is worldwide.
Broadcasting from an undisclosed location deep within the neon capital of the world, Las Vegas, Nevada. For more information on the host and the show, please visit InsideTheMatrix.org. That's InsideTheMatrix.org. It's time to break the chains of manipulated consciousness and claim our true nature as creative divine beings. Inside the Matrix. Inside the Matrix.
This is KCOR Las Vegas, home of the Digital Radio Network, broadcasting from a shack just south of Area 51.
Wait, that doesn't exist.
This is the KCOR Digital Radio Network. Now for the news.